is not and will not be America's fight alone. One of the things we've learned over this last decade is America can make a decisive difference. But I want to be clear. The American forces that have been deployed to Iraq do not and will not have a combat mission. They will support Iraqi forces on the ground as they fight for their own country against these terrorists. As your commander-in-chief, I will not commit you and the rest of our armed forces to fighting another ground war in Iraq.
Well, in Iraq. Welcome, folks. President Obama today contradicting what the Joint Chiefs Chairman said yesterday, that ground troops have to remain on the table. He just, again, and it's almost like a broken record I've become. There he is warning our enemy, telling our enemy, giving information to the enemy, we will never, ever send in ground forces. All right, what can I tell you? Pat Buchanan is going to weigh in on all this, but first, we're going to watch this together.
It will only be defeated when moderate Arab and Muslim populations in the region reject it. And therefore, the way forward seems to me to run clearly through a coalition of Arab and Muslim partners and not through the ownership of the United States in this issue. And so the strategy does that. It seeks to build a coalition, encourage an inclusive government to address the grievances that have caused this in the first place.
Address the grievances. Yeah, I can't. Joining us now is Patrick J. Buchanan, best-selling author, former GOP presidential candidate, former senior advisor to Presidents Nixon, Ford, and Reagan, and his latest book, The Greatest Comeback, How Richard Nixon Rose from Defeat to Create the New Majority. There it is on the screen. Hello, Pat.
How you doing, Steve?
I'm doing well. All right, you know, I listened to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs speak yesterday, and in addition to that, he also did say that ground troops remain an option today. The president telling the troops there will be, definitive, the most definitive he's been, almost in response to what the Joint Chiefs Chairman said yesterday. There will not be ground troops sent into Iraq, not now and not in the future. You wrote a piece calling this the forever war. When you hear this strategy of telling the enemy we're not going to send in ground troops, of relying on a coalition that really doesn't exist, and saying we're going to address the grievances that cause this, what? That there are Christians and they like chopping their heads off? I mean, what's the future hold here?
Well, the strategy we've been offered for victory over ISIS in Syria and Iraq is simply incoherent and non-credible. And the Republican Party, certainly in my judgment, and the conservatives should not support any such war because it is an open-ended war. There is no prospect I can see of victory. It is, you look down the road and you see nothing there. Steve, take a look, for example, at what we have going in Syria. You've got the ability to crush ISIS between the Turks, who have a 400,000-man army, and Assad, who is not a very desirable fellow, but his army on the south and the Turks on the north could crush it. You read, for example, the Wall Street Journal editorial this morning. They want us to attack Assad with air power, and the Turks have told us they're not going in and we can't use their bases. You cannot defeat ISIS without an army. And what army do we have? We're working on building up an army which I understand will have, quote, 5,000 moderates partially trained in 6 months and send them into battle against these forces that have tens of thousands of troops. You simply ought not to do that, go into that kind of war, because you're inviting another American endless war, and in this case, a clear defeat.
Yeah, it just seems like, you know, I mean, I know you don't want to go in probably even with the ground troops, but if you're going to do it, do it right.
You don't send American ground troops into Syria. That's insane. Do we want to control that place?
No. But we do have to we do have to take care of ISIS one way or another. But it's not.
I think so. Let me say on ISIS, they cut the heads off of 2 Americans. It's a brutal attack. Gaddafi, when I was in Reagan's White House, he blew up the Berlin discotheque. And Reagan ran it down, and we found out who did it, and it was Gaddafi, and his guys ordered it. And he woke up one morning, and his intelligence headquarters was hit by FB-111s flying out of Britain, and someone rolled a 500-pounder into his tent. Now, that's what you do when they do an atrocity like that. You don't automatically declare war and say we're going to have to send an army in and occupy a capital and take care of a country for 10 years.
So you think we could find the leadership and go get him?
I think if you find the leadership of ISIS, the new caliph, I think, yeah, I would support. If the president, I woke up in the morning and it said the president said we sent in planes and we got permission from Assad's government because we knew where they were, and we killed this guy, every American would applaud, and I would be among them.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Let me ask you, you wrote a piece about a couple of weeks ago about Hillary, and has she ever been right? Talking about foreign policy. I read the column, but why don't you answer that question?
Well, let's take Hillary herself. She said the worst mistake of her Senate career, and it was the most important vote, was voting to authorize war in Iraq. Now, she voted to authorize that war, which is, we don't need to get into who's responsible for all of this, but that is the father of everything that's going on in Iraq today. She said her most important vote was a mistake, and then she said she voted against the surge, even though she believed it was a good idea to maintain her political viability in Iowa. Where is the statesmanship in her Senate career? I don't see it. Stephen, tell me the great accomplishment of Hillary Rodham Clinton when she was Secretary of State. I mean, her book, from everything I understand, is a crashing bore. It talks about all the different people she met. Where is the great success? Was it the reset with Putin, with Russia? Where is it?
You mean you didn't read the book, Pat?
My friend John McLaughlin of the McLaughlin Group did, and I've been kidding him about it ever since.
No, she not only are there no successes, but the Russian reset was a disaster. The Syrian policy was a disaster. Everything foreign policy-wise under this president and under her reign as Secretary of State was a disaster. You're right. Her accomplishment is she traveled more miles than any other Secretary of State.
Exactly, and she's going to have to answer for all this. And we now get indications that she disagrees with Barack Obama. And then we had, what do they call it, a hug-in or something like that up on Martha's Vineyard? Where they get together and hug? Look, this is the modern generation. We didn't do that in the days of John Foster Dulles.
Yeah. All right, we got a vote coming. Is Scotland going to pull out of the UK?
I don't know, but there's a very large, as of about a week ago, there was a tremendously large undecided, close to 20%. And if that's the case, those are people who are clearly thinking of pulling out. And my view would have been then that they tend to go, with obviously if they're thinking about it, they're going to say, what the devil, let's go ahead and do it. I don't know, but to be honest, I think eventually it's coming when you have at least half the country doesn't want to be part of Great Britain anymore. They want self-determination. They want to rule and govern themselves. And as I wrote in that column, what would Braveheart do, Steve? Yeah. I mean, this is all over the world. You see in Britain and the Bretons over there in France, as well as the Corsicans. You see the Catalans in Spain. You see the Basque in Spain. They want out. You see the Venetians want out of Italy. You see the Tyroleans who don't belong in Italy anyhow. They were taken away after World War I. All of these smaller groups, ethnic groups, appear to want self-determination and to break away from the older countries to which they belong. I mean, the Crimea, whether we like it or not, I think that vote was reflective of the fact that the Russians in Crimea like their identification with Russia, and they're a clear majority there, and I have no problem with that. I think these things ought to be done peacefully, and they ought to be voted democratically, but that's what's coming, and we ought to get out of the way.
All right, let me ask you, domestically here, Rand Paul, is he playing a balancing act here? Is he selling out his libertarian views and commitments in order to appeal to the masses, especially when it comes to foreign policy now?
I wouldn't use that term on Rand Paul. I like him, but there's no doubt that you got to deal with certain realities, and all of us, those of us who think it'd be a terrible mistake to plunge back in, send another American army into another Middle East war and bring home those the wounded warriors and the dead to Dover. I think that's a terrible idea. At the same time, when you cut off the heads of American citizens, innocent journalists, we got to respond. And I think that's what Rand Paul is. He's a realist in foreign policy. He's not an isolationist. Neither, incidentally, am I. We're a great power, a fourth of the world economy. and the greatest military power on earth in air, sea, and space. And I think you've got to be involved in mankind. But I do think that clearly his views are not the same as father, who's much more of a purist libertarian.
Yeah, all right. So is he going to alienate his libertarian base by supporting action in Iraq and Syria?
Where do you think they'll go?
I don't know. I don't know.
No, there's no doubt that some of the libertarians are critical of Rand Paul, and they feel he's not a purist and he's not as hardcore as his father, and that's certainly.
But he's the best they got, right?
Exactly. I mean, that's where I think they'll wind up supporting him. You saw the poll. In New Hampshire, he's at 15%, I think 5% ahead of anybody, but nobody's got any real support, except Romney was not in the poll, which is very interesting.
Yeah. You think Romney will run?
It's a guess, but it's very hard for me to see how someone can look at it and look at the fact that he's got a real shot at the nomination and then walk away from it when the man believes he ought to be president.
So does that mean that? So you're saying yes?
Than Obama and Hillary.
So you're saying yes?
My guess is, but I don't know. He doesn't communicate with me.
Yeah, no. But your scenario and your analysis would lead you to believe that it would be hard for him not to run, is what you're saying.
I think, if you look at that, well, let me say this. If it were me and I looked at those kinds of numbers, I'd be on the next flight to Manchester.
Gotcha. Hey, Pat, always great talking to you, sir. Appreciate it.
Pleasure. Take it easy.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Pat Buchanan, ladies and gentlemen, the one and the only and the great. We're coming back next with the Malzberg panel. Lots to talk about. Don't you go away.